Welcome everybody to hashtag Keeping It Civil Conversations. This week we are going over civility in the classroom, and I will be speaking to Patrick Seek, who is a former Eastern student, and he's an Eastern alumni, and now he's the director of forensics. So thank you so much for joining me today, Patrick, and I'm so excited
Absolutely.
to see what you have to say.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to have this discussion.
All right, so we'll get right into these questions here. So why is it important that students practice civility in the classroom? And how do you, as an educator and leader, foster civility among students?
Absolutely. I think right now we are in a particularly sensitive and emotional political moment. We are coming off one of the most turbulent times that we've known, and students in the classroom are incredibly tuned into that. And especially students who have a personal stake in these matters, not only politically, but culturally, in the way that those lives are affected by forces that sometimes they cannot see and sometimes struggle to articulate what it is that they are seeing and feeling. And to that end, I think civility gives us guardrails to handle that sensitivity, to handle those emotions, and to handle that turbulence. We need to find a way to talk, and we need to find a way to communicate with, through, and across difference. And the only way we can do that is if we have a common respect, a common basis of understanding to meet each other and meet each other with compassion and meet each other with common respect. In my own classroom, what I explain is that civility is the guardrail to conversation.
Mhm.
Civility allows us to proceed without um, venturing into personal offense, without venturing into personal experience, which might mire the conversation into such abstraction that we lose track of the things that we are actually trying to talk about. So the way that I, as an educator, try to foster civility is by first explaining what civility is. Civility is those guardrails. The second way that I try to foster civility in the classroom is by establishing ground rules with the class. If we know that there are guardrails, I don't think it's my place as an educator to solely dictate what those guardrails are. So we have a discussion in class about what those rules are going to be. Some classes have elected to highlight who is speaking. So, you know, sort of a talking stick sort of mentality where we are outwardly identifying who is the speaker. I try to highlight active listening. And this is one of the hardest things for students to do. We can get lost in our own personal experiences, lost in whatever it is that we read in that morning's news. And taking the time to really actively engage with those listening skills is going to be a skill that we have to practice and is part of those rules that we establish. The final rule, and I think the most important rule that I try to establish in every single classroom, and is, in my mind, the basis of civility, is by establishing that questions come from a place of curiosity, not from a place of malevolence. If we say the classroom is about facilitating understanding, about enhancing students' understanding of the world around them, then we have to allow students to make mistakes, to ask questions that might be clumsy, allow them to be corrected, but we approach with compassion. And if we come with compassion, we come with grace, and we come with understanding, then I believe civility flows naturally from that orientation. And so all of those rules come together to create a cohesive classroom experience that is not only educational, but most importantly, challenging to individual students.
Yes, and I've actually been in one of your classes, and I think you do a wonderful job of fostering really respectful and open conversations. And it's been a very great learning experience. And you really actually get to know the students a lot better too, because you're able to talk to them about like a wide range of topics. So I think you do
Absolutely, I
a
appreciate
very,
that. And
yeah.
it is about allowing those personal experiences. It really is a double-edged sword in the sense that we want to utilize those experiences to manifest what it is that we are learning in class, but we also don't want to stop there, right? We want to use those personal experiences as an anecdote and as a springboard to learning about each other and learning about these concepts. So, for example, in intercultural communication, which is my favorite class to teach, those personal experiences structure the theories and the concepts that otherwise seem esoteric in a textbook. If we use those as the basis of our education, then yes, we get to know students better and we let it fuel that civility that is so important in the classroom.
Yes, yeah, that's so great. Yeah, thank you so much for that. So from your perspective, do you feel that college campuses promote open expression of individuality and diversity within the bounds of courtesy, sensitivity, and respect?
Absolutely. And call me biased because I'm in higher education and I believe fundamentally in not only the right to higher ed, but that students should embrace the experiences within higher education. I think here at EMU, I think we absolutely promote individuality and diversity within those bounds that you talk about. If we look around, if we look at the news, if we look in even in the sports sphere, the entertainment spheres, we see people really struggle to express ideas and not either immediately get backlash, which might be counterproductive, or we see them really struggle to articulate what it is that they are feeling and seeing. Higher education college campuses are one of the few places I think left in the country where we can have that courtesy, we can have that sensitivity and respect to articulate what it is that we are seeing and what it is that we are thinking. I think college campuses are able to do this in a couple different ways. I think number one, college campuses are able to ground these conversations within a broader curriculum of theory. So in communication studies, we always link back to what it is that we're actually talking about in class. So it becomes less about becoming right and more about learning. If we prioritize that education, then all of those things, courtesy, sensitivity, respect, they flow naturally from that commitment to education. The second way that I think, for all of the political hullabaloo about free expression, I think college campuses facilitates active debates about the way that we should see our world politically. If you foster debate and a commitment to the rules of debate, that we are being and offering rational arguments, that we are offering respect for those that we might disagree with, then sensitivity, courtesy, and respect, all of those are going to come as a result of that debate, not inhibit it. The last way that I think that college campuses facilitate open expression of individuality is that we allow, we being college campuses, you can see my pride coming through, that individuality to be centered, not marginalized. So when we talk about people with minoritized identities, be that people of color, particularly Black people, if we talk about trans folks, if we talk about people like me, disabled people who do not regularly feel seen in the political discourse, college campuses say no. That source of difference is not a reason to be silenced. That's a reason to be amplified. And that amplification within the context of civility not only makes those marginalized folks feel seen, it adds something new, compelling, and additive to those debates that we're already having. And that is such a unique and special thing that happens on college campuses.
Yeah, and I loved what you said about in the classes, it's about learning and not always being right, but actually learning from each other and learning about the topics and actually applying it to your life. So I think that's super important, and I love that you do that in your classes as well. So how might professors and students maintain a better climate of mutual respect for each other in their conversations?
Absolutely. This is a challenge. And I'm not going to lie about that. If one person had all of the answers, then our current state would not be what it is. I really want to kind of highlight this relationship that you're asking about, Maddie, when you say, how might professors and students?
Mhm.
Well, what that question is fundamentally calling question to is the relationship between professors and students. For me, I think I am someone in the classroom that is unusual to be at the front. An Asian American, first generation college student, and someone who grew up, lower income, and I'm disabled. What I often find is that the status of professor tends to come before the individual who is inhabiting that title. And so when I engage with students in these kinds of discussions, which are often hot button topics, it is very typical that students will lose track of who they're talking to, where they will begin to talk to the professor rather than me. And so I think that one way that we can maintain a better climate is to be attentive to who the professor actually is. We need to get to a place where we are amplifying the voices of Black scholars and trans scholars and disabled scholars. And the way that we do that is by making sure that students are also involved in that active work of engaging them in the conversation. So I think that's sort of the first place that I would point to.
Yep.
The second way that I think that professors and students can maintain that climate of mutual respect is just by prioritizing listening. I know that that sounds too easy, but in my personal experience, I remember being in classes as a student at Eastern and seeing the incongruence that can happen between students and professors. One that I think of specifically was a professor was trying to explain how systemic racism functions within the US, and a student who's a white student simply didn't understand, probably didn't have the life experience or the personal knowledge to see how those mechanisms of systemic racism function in their everyday life. The student wasn't being antagonistic, the student wasn't being resistant to the education. It was more they were having a really hard time connecting this broad topic to their personal experience. And so I think when professors and students come to the table with each other, is to meet them at the common place of personal experience. What is it that we have experienced in our lives that constructs our worldview and frames how we orient to the conversation we're about to have in class? I think about that all the time because it was neither of their fault. But if they meet each other where they are, then they go to a place together that is more fruitful and more educational. At the end of the day, professors are people too. They have individual stakes in the things that they are talking about, and they have dedicated their lives to studying the things they are talking about. If that's the case, I would implore students to share in that enthusiasm, even if it's in disagreement, but in enthusiasm toward moving through that conversation with them and at least taking away a more empathetic understanding of the world. And that all powers civility and it powers what I believe to be the best of higher education.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing all this today. I think it's so important that the students, professors, everybody on college campuses learns that practicing civility is a great way to produce really productive and educational conversations where we can learn from each other, accept each other, and respect each other. And it just makes a really great environment. So thank you so much for joining me today and doing this interview with me. So thank you so much, Patrick. You did a very
Absolutely.
great
Thank
job.
you.